Lyrical abstraction is either of two related but distinct trends in post-war modernist painting. European Abstraction Lyrique, born in Paris, the French art critic Jean José Marchand being credited with coining its name in 1947. Considered as a component of when the name of this movement was coined in 1951 by Pierre Guéguen and Charles Estienne, the author of L'Art à Paris, 1945 to 1966, and American Lyrical Abstraction, a movement described by Larry Aldrich in 1969. A third definition is the usage as a descriptive term. It is a descriptive term characterizing a type of abstract painting related to abstract expressionism, in use since the 1940s. Many well-known abstract expressionist painters like Arshile Gorky, seen in context, have been characterized as doing a type of painting described as lyrical abstraction. Origin. The original common use refers to the tendency attributed to paintings in Europe during the post-1945 period and is a way of describing several artists, with painters like Walz and Hans Hartung from Germany, Georges Mathieu, etc., whose works related to characteristics of contemporary American abstract expressionism. At the time, Paul Jenkins, Norman Blum, Sam Francis, Jules Litsky, Joan Mitchell, Ellsworth Kelly and numerous other American artists were, as well, living and working in Paris and other European cities. With the exception of Kelly, all of those artists developed the versions of painterly abstraction that has been characterized at times as lyrical abstraction, Takisme, color field, nuagisme and abstract expressionism. The art movement Abstraction Lyrique was born in Paris after the war. At the time, the artistic life in Paris, which had been devastated by the occupation and collaboration, resumed, with numerous artists exhibited again as soon as the liberation of Paris in mid-1944. According to the new abstraction forms that characterized some artists, the movement was named by the art critic Jean José Marchand and the painter Georges Mathieu in 1947. Some art critics also looked at this movement as an attempt to restore the image of artistic Paris, which had held the rank of capital of the arts until the war. Lyrical abstraction also represented a competition between the School of Paris and the New York School of Abstract Expressionism painting, represented above all since 1946 by Jackson Pollock, then Willem de Kooning and Mark Rothko, which were also promoted by the American authorities from the early 1950s. Lyrical abstraction was opposed not only to the Cubist and Surrealist movements that preceded it, but also to geometric abstraction. Lyrical abstraction was, in some ways, the first to apply the lessons of Kandinsky, considered one of the fathers of abstraction. For the artists, lyrical abstraction represented an opening to personal expression. Finally, in the late 1960s, many painters reintroduced painterly options into the works, and the Whitney Museum and several other museums and institutions at the time formally named and identified the movement and uncompromising return to painterly abstraction as lyrical abstraction. European Abstraction Lyrique. Just after World War II, many artists, old and young, were back in Paris where they worked and exhibited. Nicolas de Staël, Serge Poliakoff, Andrei Lanskoy and Zaks from Russia, Hans Hartung and Walz from Germany, Arpad Simpson, Simon Hantai from Hungary, Alexandra Istrati from Romania, Jean-Paul Riopel from Canada, Vieira da Silva from Portugal, Gerard Ernest Schneider from Switzerland, Fito from Spain, Bram van Velde from the Netherlands, Albert Bitran from Turkey, Zao Wuo Yuki from China, Sugai Guy from Japan, Sam Francis, John Koenig, Jack Youngerman and Paul Jenkins from the USA. All these artists and many others were at the time among the lyrical abstractionists, with the French Georges Mathieu, Pierre Solages, Nallard, Jean-René Bazin, Jacques Doucet, Camille Bryan, Jean Lemerle, Gustave Singier, Alfred Manessier, Roger Bizier, Pierre Talcott, Jean Messager and others. Lyrical abstraction was opposed not only to L'école de Paris, remains of pre-war style, but to Cubist and Surrealist movements that had preceded it, and also to geometric abstraction. Lyrical abstraction was in some ways the first to apply the lessons of Kandinsky, considered one of the fathers of abstraction. For the artists in France, lyrical abstraction represented an opening to personal expression. In Belgium, Louis van Lint figured a remarkable example of an artist who, after a short period of geometric abstraction, has moved to a lyrical abstraction in which he excelled. Many exhibitions were held in Paris, for example in the Galeries Arnaud, Drouin, Jean Bucker, Louis Carré, Galerie de France, and every year at the Salon des Réalités Nouvelles and Salon de Mai, where the paintings of all these artists could be seen. At the Drouin Gallery one could see Jean Lemerle, Gustave Singier, Alfred Manessier, Roger Bizier, Walls and others. A wind blew over the capital when Georges Mathieu decided to hold two exhibitions, L'Imaginaire in 1947 at the Palais du Luxembourg, which he would have preferred to call Abstraction Lyrique to impose the name, and then HWPSMTB within 1948. In March 1951 was held the larger exhibition Véhémences Confrontées in the Galerie Nina Dorset, where for the first time were presented side-to-side French and American abstract artists. It was organized by the critic Michel Tapier, whose role in the defense of this movement was of the highest importance. With these events, he declared that the lyrical abstraction is born. It was, however, a fairly short reign, which was quickly supplanted by the new realism of Pierre Estienne and Yves Klein. Starting around 1970, this movement has been revived by a new generation of artists born during or immediately after the Second World War. Some of its key promoters include Paul Calloz, Georges Romathieu, Michel Destarac, and Thibaut de Rimpré. An exhibition entitled The Lyrical Flight Paris 1945–1956, bringing together the works of 60 painters, was presented in Paris at the Musée du Luxembourg from April to August 2006 and included the most prominent painters of the movement: Georges Mathieu, Pierre Solages, Gerhard Schneider, Zao Oyuki, Albert Bitron, Serge Poliakov. Artists in Paris and beyond United States. American lyrical abstraction is an art movement that emerged in New York City, Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., and then Toronto and London during the 1960s–1970s, characterized by intuitive and loose paint handling, spontaneous expression, illusionist space, acrylic staining process, occasional imagery, and other painterly and near-technological techniques. Lyrical abstraction led the way away from minimalism in painting and toward a new freer expressionism. Painters who directly reacted against the predominating formalist, minimalist, and pop art and geometric abstraction styles of the 1960s turned to new, experimental, loose, painterly, expressive, pictorial and abstract painting styles. Many of them had been minimalists working with various monochromatic geometric styles, and whose paintings publicly evolved into new abstract painterly motifs. American lyrical abstraction is related in spirit to abstract expressionism, color field painting and European Tachisme of the 1940s and 1950s as well. Tachisme refers to the French style of abstract painting current in the 1945 to 1960 period. Very close to art informal, it presents the European equivalent to abstract expressionism. The Sheldon Museum of Art held an exhibition from the 1st of June until the 29th of August 1993 entitled Lyrical Abstraction, Color and Mood. Some of the participants included Dan Christensen, Walter Darby Bannard, Ronald Davis, Helen Frankenthaler, Sam Francis, Cleve Gray, Ronnie Landfield, Morris Lewis, Jules Ilitsky, Robert Natkin, William Pettit, Mark Rothko, Lawrence Stafford, Peter Young and several other painters. At the time the museum issued a statement that read in part, "As a movement, lyrical abstraction extended the post-war modernist aesthetic and provided a new dimension within the abstract tradition which was clearly indebted to Jackson Pollock's drip painting and Mark Rothko's stained color forms. This movement was born out of a desire to create a direct physical and sensory experience of painting through the monumentality and emphasis on color, forcing the viewer to read paintings literally as things." During 2009, the Boca Raton Museum of Art in Florida hosted an exhibition entitled Expanding Boundaries, Lyrical Abstraction Selections from the Permanent Collection. At the time, the museum issued a statement that said in part, "Lyrical abstraction arose in the 1960s and 70s, following the challenge of minimalism and conceptual art. Many artists began moving away from geometric, hard-edge, and minimal styles, toward more lyrical, sensuous, romantic abstractions worked in a loose gestural style. These lyrical abstractionists sought to expand the boundaries of abstract painting, and to revive and reinvigorate a painterly tradition in American art. At the same time, these artists sought to reinstate the primacy of line and color as formal elements in works composed according to aesthetic principles, rather than as the visual representation of socio-political realities or philosophical theories, characterized by intuitive and loose paint handling, spontaneous expression, illusionist space, acrylic staining process, occasional imagery, and other painterly techniques." The abstract works included in this exhibition sing with rich fluid color and quiet energy. Works by the following artists associated with lyrical abstraction will be included: Nat Varbavza, Stanley Boxer, Lamar Briggs, Dan Christensen, David Diao, Friedel de Zubas, Sam Francis, Dorothy Gillespie, Cleve Gray, Paul Jenkins, Ronnie Landfield, Pat Lipsky, Joan Mitchell, Robert Natkin, Jules Ilitsky, Larry Poons, Gary Rich, John Seary, Jeff Way and Larry Zox. History of the term in America. Lyrical Abstraction, an exhibition in the Whitney Museum of American Art, May 25, July 6, 1971, was described by John I. H. Bohr, curator of the Whitney Museum of American Art, to be given an entire exhibition surveying a current trend in American art at a single blow is an experience unusual to the verge of the bizarre. Mr. Aldrich defines the trend of lyrical abstraction and explains how he came to acquire the works. Lyrical Abstraction was the title of a circulating exhibition which commenced at the Aldrich Contemporary Art Museum, Ridgefield, Connecticut from April 5 through June 7, 1970, and ended at the Whitney Museum of American Art, New York, May 25 through July 6, 1971. Lyrical abstraction is a term that was used by Larry Aldrich in 1969 to describe what Aldrich said he saw in the studios of many artists at the time. Mr. Aldrich, who is a successful designer and art collector, defined the trend of lyrical abstraction and explained how he came to acquire the works. In his statement of the exhibition, he wrote, "Early last season, it became apparent that in painting there was a movement away from the geometric, hard edge, and minimal, toward more lyrical, sensuous, romantic abstractions in colors which were softer and more vibrant. The artist's touch is always visible in this type of painting, even when the paintings are done with spray guns, sponges, or other objects. As I researched this lyrical trend, I found many young artists whose paintings appealed to me so much that I was impelled to acquire many of them. The majority of the paintings in the Lyrical Abstraction exhibition were created in 1969, and all are a part of my collection now. Larry Aldrich donated the paintings from the exhibition to the Whitney Museum of American Art. For many years the term lyrical abstraction was a pejorative, which unfortunately adversely affected those artists whose works were associated with that name. In 1989, Union College art history professor, the late Daniel Robbins, observed that lyrical abstraction was the term used in the late 60s to describe the return to painterly expressivity by painters all over the country, and consequently, Robbins said, the term should be used today because it has historical credibility. Exhibition participants. The following artists participated in the exhibition: Lyrical Abstraction. Relation to other tendencies. Lyrical abstraction along with the Fluxus movement and post-minimalism sought to expand the boundaries of abstract painting and minimalism by focusing on process, new materials and new ways of expression. Post-minimalism often incorporating industrial materials, raw materials, fabrications, found objects, installation, serial repetition, and often with references to Dada and Surrealism is best exemplified in the sculptures of Eva Hesse. Lyrical abstraction, conceptual art, post-minimalism, earth art, video, performance art, installation art, along with the continuation of Fluxus, abstract expressionism, color field painting, hard edge painting, minimal art, op art, pop art, photorealism and new realism extended the boundaries of contemporary art in the mid-1960s through the 1970s. Lyrical abstraction is a type of freewheeling abstract painting that emerged in the mid-1960s when abstract painters returned to various forms of painterly, pictorial expressionism with a predominant focus on process, gestalt and repetitive compositional strategies in general, characterized by an overall gestalt, consistent surface tension, sometimes even the hiding of brush strokes, and an overt avoidance of relational composition. It developed, as did post-minimalism, as an alternative to strict formalist and minimalist doctrine. Lyrical abstraction shares similarities with color field painting and abstract expressionism, especially in the freewheeling usage of paint, texture, and surface. An example is illustrated by the painting by Ronnie Landfield entitled For William Blake. Direct drawing, calligraphic use of line, the effects of brushed, splattered, stained, squeegeed, poured, and splashed paint superficially resemble the effects seen in abstract expressionism and color field painting. However, the styles are markedly different. Setting it apart from abstract expressionism and action painting of the 1940s and 1950s is the approach to composition and drama. As seen in action painting, there is an emphasis on brushstrokes, high compositional drama, dynamic compositional tension, while in lyrical abstraction there is a sense of compositional randomness, all-over composition, low-key and relaxed compositional drama, and an emphasis on process, repetition, and an all-over sensibility. The differences with color field painting are more subtle today because many of the color field painters like Helen Frankenthaler, Jules Ilitsky, Sam Francis, and Jack Bush, with the exceptions of Morris Louis Ellsworth Kelly, Paul Feely, Thomas Downing, and Gene Davis, evolved into lyrical abstractionists. Lyrical abstraction shares with both abstract expressionism and color field painting a sense of spontaneous and immediate sensual expression. Consequently, distinctions between specific specific artists, and the styles become blurred and seemingly interchangeable as they evolve. By the mid-1950s, Richard Diebenkorn abandoned abstract expressionism and, along with David Park, Elmer Bischoff and several others, formed the Bay Area Figurative School with a return to figurative painting. During the period between the fall 1964 and the spring of 1965, Diebenkorn traveled throughout Europe. He was granted a cultural visa to visit and view Henri Matisse paintings in important Soviet museums. He traveled to the then Soviet Union to study Henri Matisse paintings in Russian museums that were rarely seen outside of Russia. When he returned to painting in the Bay Area in mid-1965, his resulting work summed up all that he had learned from his more than a decade as a leading figurative painter. When in 1967 he returned to abstraction, his works were parallel to movements like the color field movement and lyrical abstraction. In the 1960s, English painter John Harlan's color field paintings were characterized by simple rectangular shapes, high key color and a flat picture surface. In the 1970s his paintings became more textured. During the 1960s and 1970s, he showed his paintings in New York City with the Robert L. Kahn Gallery and the Andre Emmerich Gallery. His paintings were closely aligned with post-painterly abstraction, color field painting and lyrical abstraction. Abstract expressionism preceded color field painting, lyrical abstraction, fluxus, pop art, minimalism, post-minimalism, and the other movements of the 1960s and 1970s, and it influenced the later movements that evolved. The interrelationship of and between distinct but related styles resulted in influence that worked both ways between artists young and old, and vice versa. During the mid-1960s in New York, Los Angeles and elsewhere, artists often crossed the lines between definitions and art styles. During that period, the mid-1960s through the 1970s, advanced American art and contemporary art in general was at a crossroad, shattering in several directions. During the 1970s, political movements and revolutionary changes in communication made these American styles international as the art world itself became more and more international. American lyrical abstraction's European counterpart, neo-expressionism, came to dominate the 1980s, and also developed as a response to American pop art and minimalism, and borrows heavily from American abstract expressionism. Painters in America. This is a list of artists whose work or a period as significant aspects of it has been seen as lyrical abstraction, including those before the identification of the term a tendency in America in the 1960s. Bibliography. L'Untitled Lyrique, Paris 1945–1956. Texts Patrick Giles Persin, Michel and Pierre Descartes Ragan, Musée du Luxembourg, Paris and Skira, Milan, 2006, 280 p. Gerard Zurigera, Les Annes Acutes 50, Arted, Paris, 1984. Dora Valia, L'Art Abstrait, Livre de Poche, Paris, 1980. Michel Ragan et Michel Souffort. L'Art Abstrait, Made, Paris, 1974.